Hey everyone, this is Chris, and you're listening to slash watching One Cross Radio, and today we are rejoined by nobody. It's just me. I guess you could say we're rejoined by myself and I, but I don't know how funny that joke is. So, if it's not funny, please pretend it didn't happen. So today we are going to talk about reimagining characters, or when you remake movies, when you reboot movies, not when you rebate, but when you reboot, when you remake, or when you do a new interpretation. But before we get into the topic proper, I just want to give a couple specific shout outs. Redeemed Otaku, as frequently. They are great. Hit them up at redeemedotaku.lisbon.com. Wonderful podcast, wonderful people. They've been shouting me out, and I appreciate it greatly. Love what they do. Specific focus on anime, but through a Christian lens. There's always good stuff in there. Even if anime is not your bag, it's interesting, and they make it sound a lot more interesting. I'm very particular when it comes to anime. The only anime I'd say that I ever really watch is if I'm revisiting some Pokemon movies, or the Pokemon Origins anime, or on the rare time where I'm like, hey, I liked Dragon Ball Z as a kid, and apparently it's awesome. I just remember it taking like 18 episodes for Goku to charge up his Kamehameha move or something. Or if it was Vegeta, you get what I mean. So at some point I want to revisit that, but it's not my favorite medium, but they spell it out and they make it sound really, really good. And the reviews are always on point. And their topics are always interesting, so definitely check them out. Another person I particularly wanted to shout out was a dear friend of mine, Melissa Miller. She is someone who I've known for a number of years. Her and her wonderful husband, Jason. They're really, really God-honoring and good people. But Melissa, a couple months ago, she had a huge Instagram account with a large following. And then for a number of reasons, she decided, you know what, I'm not done, like she hasn't left Instagram, but she's really stepped back on the whole being an influencer thing, where it's like all about you and like look how perfect your life is and all that jazz. You should look her up. She has a blog. If you Google search Melissa Miller blog, and I'll try to attach the link in the description once I've gotten the A-OK from her. She is very raw and open and honest about struggles as a mother, struggles as a daughter of Christ, struggles with parenting, with pregnancy, even as a man who can never get pregnant. There is something there and inspiring there. So if you can, check her out, and also of course Redeemed Otaku. And as always, always want to shout out Faith and Fandom, Cardboard Koinonia, Love Thy Nerd. If you ever hit up our website, there is a laundry list of places to check out, and I recommend each and every one of them. Alright, so on to the topic proper. This is inspired, what kind of made me want to talk about this was I was having a conversation with my brother Dave, who was on the podcast a couple, or more than a couple months ago, but I'm not the best with time, where we talked about Star Trek, and him and I were talking about Captain Marvel, and I really didn't like how the Skrulls were used in Captain Marvel, because it goes against how the Skrulls have pretty much always been in the comics. Now, I'm not saying it was a bad reimagining, because there was enough there where I'm like, no, this is still the Skrulls, but I disliked how they were set up as the big bad, how they were, and then they wanted to switch it, but then when they switched it, it stopped being about them being bad, and it's like, well, no, they're just harmless refugees, and it was going for a comment on timely political issues. And to me, that's just not a good use of the Skrulls. I would have much rathered a more comic accurate, like, no, they are bad. They are trying to invade. They're trying to take over. because to me it's much more emotionally rich if you do that, and then the first bunch of appearances of the Skrulls, they are being the comic book Skrulls, and then later you introduce these the harmless refugee ones, because then you or me as a viewer, I'm going along with the superheroes, and I'm like, now my viewpoint's with them. Like, I shouldn't trust you, because every single time I've encountered you, you have been evil and tried to take over my planet, and you've been lying and espionaging and blah 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 blah. Like, to me, it's more rich if you go that route, and then they discover, either through some horrible happenstance to the innocent Skrulls or something, where there's a lesson to be learned there about prejudging and all that, or you get what I mean. Whereas now, if they keep on going with the Skrulls, and they get to the secret invasion stuff, and they get to the Skrulls being what the Skrulls are, there's no payoff for me there, just because I know that's coming, because that's what they do. Dave disagreed, and he argued his point well, even though I disagree. But anyways, it got us onto the larger topic of reimagining characters and how you do that well. So I'm going to give a couple examples. I don't know how long this episode will be. It might be on the shorter end. We'll see. But to me, if you're reimagining a character, I'm not saying it has to be a slave to the original continuity. It has to be the exact same thing. Because you can breathe new life into it. An example would be when Marvel first started doing their Ultimate Comics, like Spider-Man. Peter Parker was still different, but there was enough things that were still the same. That as they changed him and as they changed the Ultimate characters, like, you still had enough stuff where you as a reader were picking up the book and it's like, no, I can buy this as Peter Parker. It wasn't suddenly Peter was a streetwise, non-science-y, grasshopper-powered person named Spider-Man. Or it wasn't suddenly something completely against the pre-established character where there was no semblance of who the original character was. DC and their Elseworlds, it's always interesting when they do Elseworlds. A great example is Superman Red Son, where instead of landing in Kansas, Superman landed in Soviet Russia, and then you had, like, he was adopted by the state instead of a local family that raised him with, like, American or North American values, whatever you want to say. But he was still a hero, even though his motivations were advancing Russia. It wasn't at, like, I'm going to kill people to do this. He was still very much Superman, and you could see that. But there was enough differences where it's like, this is interesting. But there were still enough characteristics that were similar where you're like, yep, nope, it makes sense that I'm reading a character named Superman. There was a really cool different version of Batman in there, where it was a very different take on the character, but there was still enough few things where you're like, yep, no, although this Batman kills, there's enough differences, but still the few similarities where you're like, okay, no, I can get how this interpretation of Batman is considered a Batman. I think there's a fine line to it, to reimagining a character. Like, Trekkies will either agree or disagree, and some don't at me. I'm not trying to start a fight. But for example, in the Kelvin timeline Treks, they did take liberty and they introduced new versions of these characters, but I still think there was enough there where you're like, yes, no, I get why this character is named Kirk. I get why this character is named Spock, even though this Spock is much more emotional than TOS Spock ever was. There's enough stuff there where you're like, okay, I get that why Scotty. Scotty is still Scottish. It's not like he's an Irish person who has nothing to do with it, but it's like, no, this Montgomery Scott, he's not even an engineer. He's like a food person before the replicators are invented. I'm scratching my head for a job, but you get what I mean. I think when you're reimagining a character or reimagining a property, you have to do it well. You have to do it where it's not like you have to do everything the exact same. But if you're if you're putting a title of something on, you are selling a product. And what any viewer, reader, listener, whatever, like, it has to be, there's an expectation, right? Like, if I'm going to see a movie called Doctor Who, which I'm gonna turn my webcam at now, like, it's got to have something to do with at the very least, there's got to be the blue police box going through space. There's got to be a character named the Doctor that's a Time Lord. You can update the character as it goes, as the show does. But there needs to be some stuff. If it's no time or space travel, then what the heck am I watching? Like, it's happened a lot with comic book movies, thankfully not as much as it used to, where it would just be like, okay, well, here's a known IP, so let's just slap that on something. The excellent Netflix series, The Toys That Made Us, actually looks at that with the example of Star Trek, because the original Star Trek toys were terrible, and they had nothing to do with Trek. It would be like they took a bike helmet that they released for something completely else, slapped a new coat of paint on it, and then put the Star Trek label on it, and you're like, here you go. It had nothing to do with the show. It was just to make a quick buck. You really need to do something. An example, I think, of a good reimagining, film-wise, would be... Actually, two come to mind, and that I'll go a bad one first, and then I'll go a good one. A bad one is the 1998 Godzilla, where, outside of loose mentionings of the atomic radiation and the roar, that giant iguana Jay Leno chin having chicken-legged guy, sorry, I'm lifting quotes borderline verbatim from the honest trailer for it. It's hilarious. But that thing, which has now been named Zilla by Toho, had no nothing that would make me think as I'm watching it, it's like, oh, this is Godzilla. Like, no atomic breath. Nothing. Like, that is very much a cash grab kind of thing, where two other examples involving Godzilla come to mind. The 2014 one by Gareth Edwards, to me, was a great reimagining, where Godzilla looked quite different, but still quite similar. The roar was quite similar. It had atomic breath. It had the same general design. Yeah, there were enough differences, but also enough similarities that even different motivations and things that made Godzilla in that movie tick. But there were still enough similarities that me, as a decent-sized Godzilla fan, not in terms of my physical stature, you get what I mean, but there was enough things there that I, as a fan, could connect with, being like, okay, yes, that is Godzilla. It's a different take, but it's still enough to make me think that's Godzilla. I'm now not upset that I spent money on something that was not what I thought it was going to be. Heck, another example with Godzilla is the last Toho live-action film, like Shin Godzilla. That had that's the first Toho Godzilla movie that completely reboots, has no connection whatsoever to the 1954 original, where Godzilla is given a new origin. It has different forms, and it doesn't even really begin to resemble the Godzilla that we've known for 50 plus years until almost an hour in. And then even then it's similar but drastically different. But there's still enough there in the DNA where you're like, yeah, no, this makes sense being called Godzilla. It's not King Kong labeled Godzilla or a giant iguana labeled Godzilla. Yeah, Another example of reimagining done well is in the Clone Wars when they brought back Darth Maul. Darth Maul was definitely reimagined and he needed to be. Like in terms of look, he was the same. In terms of power set, he was the same. But the character needed to change and needed to evolve. So I'd say it was a reimagining of him, because you couldn't have him be the silent, awesome assassin. Like, his character needed to express emotion, needed to express, say words, and needed to grow. Like, you couldn't do that with a character, the wonderful original version of the character from The Phantom Menace. You could not have him be what he is in the Clone Wars without those changes. But that's a good reimagining. Other examples of good reimagining happen throughout Trek. Whenever you visit the mirror universe, like, you see all these drastic different takes, but there's still enough there where you're like, I want to know how this version of Sisko became this version of Sisko, or this version of Spock became different than just like the friggin' beard, the friggin' goatee. Like, you have to have some similarities before you go into the differences. A movie that didn't, at least for me, didn't quite hit it was the most recent live action Power Rangers movie. There was some good stuff, and there was some. They were good reimagining of those characters, and you could go into how the original Power Rangers, the original Mighty Morphin series, didn't really develop the characters, which, fair, it was a 90s kids show. But there were at times there was stuff where I'm like, I'm not sure. I'd almost rather, instead of you calling it them Jason or Trini or whoever, that you come up with a new name, like almost start fresh. And that's kind of the thing. To me, if you're not going to do a good retake or a reimagining, then just create something new. Don't just slap on this name that's going to have an appeal when it's nothing to do with it, when it's got no basis of that. It's an issue I had with the X-Men The Last Stand, and especially X-Men Origins Wolverine. Deadpool's a great example of this. The first 5 minutes in X-Men Origins Wolverine, where Ryan Reynolds is playing Wade Wilson, that's very much comic accurate Wade Wilson. But when he shows up as Baraka from Mortal Kombat at the end of the movie, and they call him Deadpool, but he's not the merc with the mouth, he doesn't have the suit, he can't speak, he's got Cyclops' laser beams, and he's got friggin' katanas coming out of his arms. That's not Deadpool. That's nothing even close. A good reimagining of Deadpool, you could be like, is Deadpool Max or Ultimate Deadpool, or anything like that, where different, but still you can see how they got there. I don't want characters that I know or properties that I know just to be slapped out for a quick buck, or you still got to have some semblance. I mean, you can develop things where the characters drastically change. As much as I don't like The Last Jedi, and I watched that for the first time in ages the other day, and I only hated it more. I can't accuse them for doing like poor reimaginings or anything. Like, friggin', as much as I might not have liked what they did with Luke, they showed this drastically different character, and they kind of explained well enough, like, how he got to this old curmudgeon-y grump from the idealistic symbol of hope that he was in Return of the Jedi and the rest of the original trilogy. Like with the Picard show, it'll be very interesting if they show a very different Jean-Luc Picard, but then they can, through story elements, backtrack and get through how he became that character. Heck, in a terrific Next Generation episode, The Tapestry, they showed how he was a very different Jean-Luc Picard in his younger age, but then they had Picard talk about how those experiences changed him into the well-spoken diplomat that he was when the show came on and we got to know over the years. If, say, they keep making Star Trek movies, I'd love the TNG stuff revisited because I love those characters. But if suddenly Jean-Luc Picard in a reimagining is just cussing all the time, like more fighty than Kirk, because Kirk at least had some street smarts with the character. He was tactical, it made sense. I mean, he was always action first, but blah blah blah. Like, if Jean-Luc Picard is just like no diplomacy, straight to punching and all that and nothing else that makes that character, then don't do it. Don't call that character Jean-Luc Picard. Create a new name. Create a new character who I might have an interest in. Because you can roll with that. You can totally roll with that. You can unroll. So you can develop that character. You can create new mythology around that character. And I'm very interested in that. But if it's just a slap-on name where it's got nothing to do with what came before, the whole time I'm going to be sitting there annoyed. Like, that's not even close to who you're talking about. Like, who came up with this? Yeah. I think I'm going to stop there. So, just because I'm going to run myself in circles. But today was a shorter episode. But I don't want to repeat myself over and over and over. And I feel that can happen. But this might be a topic I might revisit later, just because it is something I have strong feelings about. And it's fun to look at times where they've done it well and they haven't. So that's where I'm actually going to invite you. At some point, I will want to have this conversation again, but with a guest, so we can look at times they did it well, times they didn't, where we feel it can be done even better. But this is where you come in, dear listener and viewer. What are some of your favorite reimaginings? When do you think they did it well? When do you think they didn't? Who do you think they've who do you think they've done very well where it hit the mark, where you're like, okay, he's different, but it's still like, I get it. I can see how he's still Aragorn. Or even though I haven't watched Stargate in years, I might now because it's on Prime. Jack O'Neill, even though I've never seen the Stargate movie, Jack O'Neill in the show is very different than Jack O'Neill in the movie, but they explained it and it made sense. At least I've been told. So, where do you think they've done that smooth transition where there was a departure, but it still made sense, or a reimagining that was done well? And when do you think they haven't? What are some in any medium, be it comics, books, films, and films and comics are what I'm more used to, but you get what I mean, or games to film, or games to whatever. Let me know, and let's get a dialogue going, because I enjoy talking about this stuff, especially with people. And then again, please make sure to, like I've mentioned earlier, hit up Faith and Fandom, Cardboard Koinonia, a great ministry, Love Thy Nerd, and of course, Reedemed Otaku, and look up Melissa Miller, and keep all these people in your prayers, because they are all wonderful, God-honoring people, and they're not just that, they're also really good people. So keep them in your prayers, especially as they are in, to varying degrees, the public eye, and yeah, just pray for them, and that God is honored through what they do, and keep that in your prayers for me as well. That's something I always want. So, with all that being said, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and God bless, my friends. Take care. Peace.